Welcome to the Dental Amigos podcast with Dr. Paul Goodman and attorney Rob Montgomery, taking you behind the scenes of the dental business world, all the things you didn't learn in dental school but wish you had. Rob is not a dentist and Paul is not a lawyer, but since Rob is a lawyer, we need to tell you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and shouldn't be considered legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not and will not create an attorney-client relationship. As is always the case, you should formally consult with legal counsel before proceeding with any legal matter. Learn more about the Dental Amigos at www.thedentalamigos.com. And now, here are the Dental Amigos.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Dental Amigos podcast. I'm Rob Montgomery, and I'm joined, as always, by the head nacho himself, Dr. Paul Goodman.
Great to be talking, Rob.
Paul, it's good to talk to you, and it's good to be podcasting. Again, the only podcast that is hosted by a lawyer and a dentist, as far as we know.
Yes, we're unique.
I haven't done any due diligence on that, Paul, recently, but I suspect that's the case. Today, we have a very special guest, Brannon Moncrief, the principal and CEO of McLaren and Associates, is with us today. He's going to be talking about practice transitions, and really, Brannon has great expertise in the DSO space and selling to DSOs of some of these larger transactions. Very seasoned veteran in the dental industry, and really excited to chat with him and hear what he thinks about the current market, and just giving our listeners some great tips and things to think about if they are looking to transition their practice. So, as I said, Brannon Moncrief has over 20 years of dental industry experience, serving as a banker, broker, and sell-side advisor. For the last 13 years, he has served as the principal and CEO of McLaren and Associates, which specializes in providing sell-side advisory to large dental practice owners seeking to monetize their business in a private sale or a DSO affiliation. Brannon has personally facilitated the sale of over 1,000 dental practices and is widely considered to be an expert when it comes to the topic of DSO affiliations. And Brannon and his guys do this stuff around the country for dentists, although he resides in Austin, Texas with his wife and two young daughters. And now, without further ado, here's Brannon Moncrief. Welcome, amigo, and thanks for being on the show.
Hey, guys. Hey, Paul. Hey, Rob. Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you, Brannon. We always ask a hard-hitting question. So if we were in Austin, Texas, where would you take us for nachos, and what is your favorite topping, your go-to topping?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, this is kind of a mecca for Tex-Mex, but I like old-school classic Tex-Mex. I'd probably do Matt's El Rancho on South Lamar. It's only a few miles from my office. I'm kind of a classic nacho guy, so cheese and pickled jalapenos. If I had to pick my favorite topping, you're in Austin, that'd have to be chopped brisket.
Oh, nice. I like that.
That's cool.
That. Brisket.
And then, so Matt's is the name of the place?
Matt's El Rancho. It's been around a long time. Actually, one of the highest grossing restaurants in Texas.
Oh, wow.
It's cool. It's funny because I've said this before. Like we ask people from around the country this question, and it's always like the more mundane names and the places where you would expect to have the sexiest nachos. So like in the Southwest, it's like names like Matt's, and then it's always some like Mexican sounding name that's more so.
It does show how universally loved nachos are. They're the golden retriever puppy of appetizers, because no one ever gets stuck. They always got a place and they know exactly it. And in fact, they usually do what Brannon does. I could hear what you were doing, Brannon. You were thinking of a few places, and Matt's came to the top. So probably there's even more than one good place. So.
Yeah, he is in ground zero for that. So let's just kick off with a very popular question that I see, Brannon, on Facebook groups and blogs where people are debating the merits of, should I sell to a private buyer dentist or a DSO? So talk to us and our audience about that. If somebody asks you that question, you're meeting with a dentist for the first time, and they say, I have a practice, I'm going to make it challenging for you. I have a practice that grosses $2 million. Who should I sell to?
That's a great question. And we always start with unpacking, like, where are you at in your career? What's your runway to exiting your business? What are your goals personally, professionally, financially? Like, define your why, right? We always have to start there, and then we start to look at, economically, what do these two options look like? Because they are very different. And when you cross about the $1.5 million rev threshold, and you're talking about 300,000 plus in EBITDA, that's where it's kind of a demarcation point when it comes to valuation and demand, private buyer versus DSO. Once you cross that threshold in the private buyer world, the buyer pool starts to narrow a little bit because there's only so many doctors that are confident and competent enough to buy a practice of that size. And lenders start to tighten up when we start talking about loan amounts, over $1 million. But in the DSO world, valuations start to accelerate and the demand increases pretty remarkably. So when we start the process, we typically unpack that why and then do a deep dive and quantify what are the economic implications of each of those options, right? Private buyer world, what's that practice worth? How's that deal going to be structured? What's going to be your post-closing obligation? And it's pretty simplistic. In the private buyer world, typically you're talking a valuation somewhere in the range of 2 to 2.5 times net cash flow, 70 to 100% of annual revenue. It's going to be 100% cash at close or close to 100% cash at close. And you're likely going to walk away or have some sort of short-term, work back. In the DSO world, completely different set of circumstances. We're looking at a multiple of EBITDA. So let's say that practice, $2 million top line revenue, has $400,000 in EBITDA. It could trade for $2.5 to $3 million from a valuation perspective, comparative to, 1.5 to 1.8 million in the private buyer world. Pretty big, delta between those valuations. But in the DSO world, it's going to come with more strings attached. You're talking, 50 to 80% cash at closing. You're talking about a 2 to 5 year post-closing commitment. So they are really night and day, but they're both viable options when you start talking about a practice of that size and caliber.
Brannon, I want to ask a question, since I'm the only one in this podcast who went to dental school. And would this be a fair way to describe EBITDA with a $2 million practice and $400,000 of EBITDA, right? And I'm going to describe it in like 6-year-old dentist world. This is the money I would make owning the practice if I had associates do all the work. Is that a fair way to describe it? If I step back and associate, so just so our listeners understand this, because I know someone's driving or on the treadmill or working out and saying, I want to hear Rob, Paul, and Brannon. This is such a hot topic, right? Just like This topic is so hot right now, like Hansel from Zoolander. Hope people get that joke. And if someone's listening saying, if you have a $200,000 practice and there's $400,000 of EBITDA, that would be the money you would make if associates dentists worked for you and you just step back and own the practice. And that's I think just is an easy way for dentists to understand it. I know financially it could be more complex, but I'm glad you said that's kind of a fair way to think about it to frame this conversation moving forward.
Yeah, absentee owner profit. So if you were not doing the dentistry, you were paying someone else to do all the dentistry. After all the overhead's paid and you pay someone else to do the dentistry, what is the cash left over at the end of the day? And that's why DSOs buy practices. They buy practices to acquire profit, to acquire EBITDA. But where a lot of doctors make the mistake is they don't factor in a market wage for the doctor. And a lot of times we'll get a call where someone says, my top line revenue is 1.2 million. I have $400,000 in EBITDA. What is my practice worth? And I'm like, hold on, back up. Did you pay yourself to do the dentistry? And in that scenario, oftentimes the answer is no. Once you factor in a wage for the doc, maybe $300,000 a year, that $1.2 million top line rev practice only has absentee owner profit EBITDA of $100,000. And therefore, it probably doesn't make sense to look at a DSO affiliation. A private buyer valuation is going to be significantly higher with a cleaner deal structure.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about deal structures too, and just so people understand, because we all throw out, cash at closing and we know what that means. But tell our listeners what you're referring to when you talk about 50 to 80% of the purchase price will be cash at closing in a DSO deal. What's the rest of it, and how does that factor into sort of the consulting and the decision that a selling doc has?
Sure. So let's use that example of the $2 million top line revenue practice with $400,000 in EBITDA. And just for simplicity purposes, let's say the valuation in the DSO world is 7 times EBITDA, so a $2.8 million valuation. So you're typically looking at cash at closing, money in your pocket of 50 to 70%. So that's going to be somewhere in the range of 1.4 to 1.8 million on the high end. And then the remainder of the value is typically some form of equity. And that equity can come in different forms. The most 2 common forms of equity are joint venture equity, what we call JV equity. That essentially means retained equity at the practice level. So it's a true partnership. Let's say you take 60% cash at close and then retain 40% equity in your own business. And rather being a partner with another clinician, you're partnered with a DSO. You're going to get 40% of the ongoing profit, and they're going to get 60% of the ongoing profit from the business on a go-forward basis. The other form of equity we refer to as holding company equity or holdco equity. And that's where you don't actually own equity in your practice. You own stock in the DSO's parent company. So you don't receive any ongoing EBITDA distributions. You own stock in the parent company, that DSO, and the goal there is once the DSO hits a recapitalization event and sells the company to the next investor, you have the opportunity to liquidate that equity in part or in full, hopefully at a handsome return. And if some deals are a hybrid deal structure where you have the cash at closing component and then the equity component is bifurcated between both types of equity. So maybe you do a 60-20-20 deal where you take 60% cash at close, 20% holdco stock, and 20% retained equity in your own practice on a go-forward basis. And there are a lot of different deal structures out there, a lot of nuances involved in these deals. Some of the deals also involve some type of earn-out or revenue or EBITDA maintenance provision. They may have an earn-up, whereby you're going to get additional cash payouts predicated upon hitting certain revenue or EBITDA growth benchmarks post-sale. And then some of them have just very unique terms. So no 2 deals are alike, and every DSO has a preference in regards to how they structure their transactions.
And I think, and that's great, and it's really helpful for people to understand that. And I think this is a good segue into, get on my soapbox here for a minute, unsolicited offers in this space, which, a lot of dentists receive unsolicited offers from a DSO. Hey, we value your practice at $10 million. We think you're great. Here's a letter of intent, and you could sign here. It's non-binding, and let's get on with things.
You don't need a pesky broker to get in the way.
You don't need
those pesky brokers. They just hold up the deals.
Exactly. And why are you going to pay a broker? We've already found us, right? Pay a broker a percentage of this deal. And then, frankly, even from a legal standpoint, you can get a lawyer involved later, but this isn't binding, right? And now the train has left the station with this one DSO. And I do want to talk about why that's bad for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is for why, what Brannon was just talking about, which is all DSOs are different. Their deal structures are different, whether they're going to offer JV equity or holdco equity or a hybrid of them, how much cash they're going to offer. And some people, some selling dentists might like that JV equity model. Some may hate it. Some may want more cash. Some may want less cash. And generally speaking, Brannon, it's true, though, that DSOs kind of have their way of doing it more or less. And so there might be some wiggle room. But if you really want to have a menu to choose from in this world as a seller of a dental practice to a DSO, you really need to bring different potential buyers and DSOs to the table to see what they're offering, to see what fits one particular doctor, because all these deals are not created equally. Doctors' goals and what they're looking for in their transition are not going to be the same. And some things might be great for Paul Goodman, but they're terrible for Rob Montgomery.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about the fact that every DSO is different. I say this all the time. If you met one DSO, you met one DSO. And if you're going to approach one of the most impactful decisions in your entire life, not just in your professional career, you need one perspective, right? And the only way you get perspective is to have a great team of advisors and to talk to multiple suitors, to shop around. You need optionality because, like you said, every doctor has a different why. They have different goals personally, professionally, financially, and they're looking for a different type of buyer. Some doctors want a buyer that's very hands-off. They want the access to the economies of scale, but don't want them meddling in the day-to-day operations of the practice, whereas some of our other clients want a DSO that's very hands-on, that has, large infrastructure where they can help, administer and operate the practice on a daily basis. Those are two very different things that people are looking for. So you need to create optionality and perspective to make sure you find the right partner for your practice. And then third, you've got to create leverage. Leverage to negotiate the best deal terms and the highest valuation you possibly can. And the only way you do that is to create competition, create, essentially, for lack of a better word, a bidding war among multiple DSOs. So even if you think you found the right fit, the right partner, the right buyer, you have to hold their feet to the fire to ensure that you're getting a fair deal. And that's where we come into play. DSOs are opportunistic. Their goal is to buy low and sell high. If you were in their shoes, you would do the exact same thing. They need to protect their investors. And it's kind of a funny conversation we have with our clients because you want them to be wildly irresponsible when they buy your practice, give you the sexiest deal structure possible and the highest valuation possible. And you want them to do the opposite for every practice they buy after yours to protect the value of your equity. But the only way you hold their feet to the fire, the only way you're going to negotiate the best possible terms is to run a formal process and to pit them against each other. And that's what we do. And the results of doing that are incredible. Oftentimes, I would say half our clients have an unsolicited offer in hand from a DSO at the time they approach us. And oftentimes the way that happens is they get a letter in the mail, or, their buddy that sold to that DSO makes an introduction to the business development person at that company. And a conversation that starts off casual becomes very serious very quickly when an LOI hits the table. And through conversations like this or a recommendation from their attorney or CPA, they call us to gut check the offer. And we say, well, hey, press pause on that conversation with that DSO. They might threaten to get up from the table, but they're not going anywhere. Let's gut check the offer. Let's do an independent EBITDA analysis. Let's talk about what we think the EBITDA is and what we think the practice would trade for in the open market, and how does that compare to the offer at hand. And what we often find is two things. The DSO has manipulated the EBITDA substantially, tried to convince you that your EBITDA is lower than it actually is. And every dollar of EBITDA can be worth $6 to $10 in value. So controlling that narrative regarding EBITDA is critically important. And then the multiple is typically a little lower than market. It might be half a turn or a turn lower than market. So by controlling the narrative regarding EBITDA and then creating that competitive environment, if you can move the needle on EBITDA by a couple $100,000 and then move the multiple by a turn, you could be talking about millions of dollars in additional value. And we've helped many, many clients achieve that. They ultimately sold to the same DSO they had already identified as being the right partner for their business, but they were more secure in that decision because they had perspective, because they talked to other buyers and were able to then say, now that I've met 10 DSOs, this is the right partner. But they ended up negotiating much better deal terms at a much higher valuation as a result of running that formal process.
I want to add in, Brandon, that was great. Both one, a special offer from me, Brandon's, Justin from Brandon's firm came to Philadelphia on the program you were on, and his talk was about exactly this, right? How the final offer was much higher. I don't want to spoil his very dramatic 25-minute presentation, so people like to watch that for free. I will put that link in the show notes. It's really eye-opening. And the other thing, Brandon, you've been around the dental world for a long time, and Rob too. Would you agree, both of you, that the dentist that you talk to, that their associate dentist, their trusted associate dentist, is one of the most important people in their life, emotionally, financially, ability to go out, spend time with their family? Would you say that an associate is a really important part of a dentist's life, Brandon? Like the owners that you know. Would you agree, Rob?
Sure.
So I was just at an event, and an owner said to me, I don't need your service for Job Connect, Paul. I was on the plane, and a third-year dental student has a boyfriend who's a fourth-year dental student, and he's moving to Philly next month. So I think I'm just going to hire him. And I go, well, that's a great start, but you really want context and choices for the most important person in your life. And what will happen is you'll interview other associates, and that plain boyfriend will either become the top associate, or you'll say, oh my gosh, there's better choices out there. And he goes, that's really good advice, Paul. And then if we just accelerate this, Brandon, what you said, I was kind of copying yours. This is the most important decision of a dentist's financial life, all their entire work. And it's wild to me how they would just say, I'm just going to go with door A and not think of any others. And actually, this is a podcast that talk about the real world of dentistry. I don't know why that is for dentists. Do you think sometimes they just don't want to go through the hassle? What do you think, Rob?
Well, I mean, for starters, the whole thing is rigged. Let's make no mistakes. This is not like an accident that this unsolicited offer is what it is. You look at the term sheet or the letter of intent, and there is an 8-figure valuation at the top, and they would like for you not to continue to read. And then some people, don't get beyond that, because if my practice is valued at $10 million or $12 million or whatever, how could anything possibly go wrong, right? And then, so that's one thing. And then, and then the next thing they look for is what is the multiple of EBITDA? And, if they see a multiple that they think is something that sounds like something that they heard a friend of theirs say that they got, well, then they're cool with that too. And then the rest of it, they don't really understand, okay? Yeah. And so that's the goal for the DSO, for them just to stop there, assume that number, nothing could go wrong, be maybe too embarrassed to go talk to somebody about what are these earnouts, talk to me about this equity rollover, what is it really, what isn't it, and what is the delta here on this employment agreement that I'm going to have post-closing versus continuing to be an owner. Like, they don't know what to ask. And, again, if you saw that $10 million number at the top, these DSOs don't want you to get past that. So and then there is a somewhat high pressure sell, I see, that comes along with that. But, I'm curious. What
do you think, Brandon?
Yeah,
what do you the psychology of dentists in that they...
Why does this work?
These are why do you think they do this? I mean, you've been around the dental world, transitions, other stuff. What's your dentist psychology take on it?
I think some of it's naivety. Some of it is they think they have a good deal, but they don't know how much better it could be. Yeah. And, dentists are somewhat notorious for, stepping over dimes to pick up pennies. They don't want to pay a broker. They don't want to pay an attorney. They don't want to pay their CPA to do the EBITDA analysis. And hence, this is where the horror stories from the DSO world come from. If you don't follow this advice, if you don't run a formal process, you risk doing several things. And that is going the DSO route when maybe that wasn't the right fit for you, selling your business prematurely, choosing the wrong partner that wasn't the right fit for your goals, leaving a ton of money on the table, not understanding the deal structure. All of those elements in combination, or even one of them alone, could lead you astray and create a lot of financial and emotional distress post-closing. And those are the stories that you often hear about, those DSO horror stories, but you don't have the context of how did they approach the process. And it's why we have, I could give you an infinite number of references of past clients who are very, very happy with what we did for them and with their DSO partner long term. And it's because they followed a very regimented process. And at any point in time, if we got to a point where it didn't make sense, they have the ability to back away and not do it. But when you're in this echo chamber that the DSO has created and they're controlling the narrative, it's very easy to fall into that trap, close a deal without really thinking it through, and then deal with ramifications, after the fact. And I'll also say, especially now, given that there have been a handful of DSOs that have failed, you have got to do your diligence, and if you're going to go down this path, you've got to pick the right horse. Mm-hmm. Or you run the risk that, how it was supposed to play out culturally, operationally, and monetarily doesn't play out the way that, maybe they had projected it in that LOI discussion. So you gotta pick the right pony in this marketplace. Because
is this the right time, Brannon? I don't want to stay friendly with you, but is this the right time? Like, you want to pick an organization like the Philadelphia Eagles that have been at the top for the past races. Because we're going to stay friends if we keep saying that. We're back in the Super Bowl for the third time in the last 7 years, Brannon. Sorry, I don't know. So that's
but that's a great point, though, if I may, Paul.
Sure.
And I think too many times, I think people misunderstand that aspect of things, Brannon, where it's like, I'm going to get 75% cash and get 25% equity in this DSO, and then when they do their recap, I'm going to be multiples richer of that. And it's like, okay, maybe, right. But if and this is where I really see people with what I believe to be a misunderstanding. It's 25%. Of the purchase price is stock in this, Bugs Bunny DSO. It's not like you're investing in, Microsoft when Bill Gates was in the garage here. The multiple and that recap for that DSO is going to be at the same multiple that, a big tried and true experienced DSO that's done this before is going to get paid. So it's not like you get paid for, essentially that additional risk in rolling equity into this unproven group, the quote unquote emerging DSOs.
I want to ask Brannon, because it's about responsible information, right? So I'm actually curious, Brannon, like, since you're so tight into this world, like, how often do you hear of a new DSO on the block? Daily, weekly, monthly?
I'd say probably weekly. And you have to understand that there's a risk-reward equation, right? If you are betting on a small, unproven DSO, there might be significantly higher upside on the equity, but there's significantly more risk associated with that, as opposed to partnering with the DSO that's had a couple of recaps and is backed by, one of the top 10 private equity firms in the world. There's going to be maybe a lower ceiling, a lower return on that equity, but far less risk. So you have to understand that there is nuance comparing, risk reward on the equity equation. And we know a lot of the water cooler talk about, who's healthy financially and who's not, interacting with all these DSOs and their management teams and their business development team and their private equity fund, seeing how their buying behavior changes from time to time and knowing the assets they have in their portfolio. I mean, we know because we have broad perspective on who we would bet on and who we would not bet on. And that's why there's over 500 DSOs buying practices right now, and we work with about 70. So what is that, 15% of the marketplace?
Right.
We'll allow to sit at the table with our clients. 85% of the marketplace is not allowed to bid on our practices.
But Brannon, is there really even a reward for those smaller, quote unquote, less, proven emerging DSOs? Because isn't it like if they get to a point where they've got $10 million of EBITDA, is their $10 million of EBITDA going to trade any differently than, the $10 million of EBITDA of a proven DSO that's done this before? Like, isn't the number the number? Like, is there really a reward for that risk, I guess, is my question.
There is, because the smaller the DSO, the less it has to grow to generate substantial arbitrage comparative to one of their peers that's substantially larger. So look at it from this perspective. If I'm a 50-location DSO and I recap and add another 200 locations over the course of 5 years, I'm 5 times larger. Right. I've grown 5x during that recap cycle by adding 200 offices. But if I'm a 500-location DSO and I recap at the same multiple and then I add 200 offices over the course of 5 years, I haven't even grown by 50%.
Right. Okay.
So my return on equity is going to be substantially lower than that smaller DSO. And as I get larger and larger, the recap cycle typically extends because I need a longer period of time to grow to generate that return.
Right.
So as a DSO gets larger, typically the recap cycle will increase in time and the return on equity will go down comparative to a smaller DSO. But I would argue a smaller DSO has more risk of potential failure than a DSO that is seasoned and been through multiple recaps and is likely owned by a more sophisticated, larger private equity firm with deeper pockets and better banking relationships and terms. So it's all relative,
Right.
and you have to take that into consideration.
Well, and but as you talk about evaluating these, I mean, there's some that we see that are just it's obvious that they don't know what they're doing. They don't have the track record. And what I'm amazed about oftentimes is where we see people that like, yeah, I'm just going to roll $3 million into this holdco equity of this DSO, and it just becomes like monopoly money.
Yeah.
And like there's no way in the world they would ever write a check for $3 million to buy stock in this company. Yeah. But it's just sort of like $3 million here, $1.5 million here, and it's like I think they just lose, become detached from reality about how much money we're actually talking about.
I can see that.
Right. It's interesting when you talk about the equity component, because I see a lot of the noise on Dental Nachos and some of these other platforms. And it's interesting that, a lot of people are saying that private equity is making a ton of money on the backs of dentists, but then also arguing that the equity is worthless. Well, those two things are mutually exclusive.
Right.
Private equity is either making a ton of money or the equity is worthless. The reality is that some of these DSOs are going to be wildly successful and generate an amazing return. That's who you want to be with, right? If you're going to choose a partner and you're going to roll equity, you want to be with one of those companies, and there are going to be a handful of DSOs that go to zero, and all the other outcomes are going to be somewhere in between. We want to make sure that we keep our clients away from anybody whose equity is going to zero. We want to make sure we keep our clients away from anybody that's going to have a mediocre return on equity. We want a good return or a great return on the equity component. So that's why we're so vigilant in the diligence we do and vetting DSOs and only allowing the best options to sit at the table with our client. And to this date, knock on wood, I can say that I have not had a client lose $1 in equity value. The handful of DSOs, and it's not a bunch. People say a bunch of DSOs have crashed and burned. That's not true. It's only been a handful, but we have not sold a single practice to those handful of DSOs that have failed and are now in receivership.
And that's
with
just
their
what
bank.
brings you back to why you need someone on your side. I want to ask a question, Brannon, that I don't think is asked.
But just don't pass on that, because I think you said that in passing, but it is important that this is like circle back to what we talked about at the outset, that, this is not the time or the place to try to save money and DIY it.
Well, Brandon's going to keep you away from
the
majority of the DSOs out there that you would have no idea are not one of those top 70 or regional 70.
Absolutely. And they're not, it's not obvious. They're not distinguishable. They don't come with like a warning. Not like, this is an inferior product.
Yeah.
Be careful. It's like they have websites and looks the same. And we had a deal with an emerging DSO for a client that, against our advice, continued to proceed with the transaction. And we knew that this was the first deal that they were doing. Lo and behold, though, they had a website with testimonials from these dentists that claimed to have sold to them. I'm like, this is not even true. You haven't done a deal yet. What is this? I mean, it's just BS. But, it didn't. It all looked good, and unless you had somebody telling you that it really wasn't what it appeared to be, which is, a good sell-side advisor or an attorney, you would really be rolling the dice.
I want to ask you.
Well, and another.
Go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to mention, because I think it goes along with the topic that we're talking about, and I think it's important to bring up. But there's been this advent with all of this private equity money flowing into our space of some dental influencers out there, consultants, whatever you want to call them, that are pitching this roll-up concept that you can wrap your arms around, 20, 50, 100 practices and pretend like they're one company and sell them all simultaneously to the same private equity buyer at a premium multiple. In other words, hey, doc, your practice is only worth 6 times EBITDA on your own, but join my co-op. You're going to pay $25,000 to join and $5,000 a month. And collectively, we're all going to come together. We're going to pretend like we're one company, and we're going to go sell for 12x or 13x or 15x simultaneously to a private equity firm. And the reality is that unicorn deal is never going to happen.
No.
It's death by a million cuts. You're going to pay these people hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're going to try to convince you for years that this unicorn deal is right around the corner, and it's never going to happen because private equity is not stupid. They are not going to pay an elevated multiple for a platform that is not integrated and has no commonality. And we have seen doctors fall for this time and time again, and we are watching these charlatans of the industry get rich pitching this trash to dentists.
Yeah.
It's a really good point.
It's a public service message brought to you by Brannon Moncrief, right? Stay away from those deals. But I think that's sort of like, I think those things appeal. We're talking about like, what's the mindset? Why do people, for lack of a better word, fall for this? And that thing, I just think people think it's like, it's the non-DSO DSO. It's sort of like, it's the rebel. Like we're going to band together and create a better new community. Like, that sounds great, but it, as Brandon said, it just doesn't work.
I want to ask you guys something I don't think people ask enough on podcasts, both of you. We have on some of our notes, what types of practices are buyers looking to purchase, things like that. But instead of that, I want to ask, what are the characteristics of successful dentists with these transitions from their happiness? Like, Brannon, you've met them from the first call to they get back to you and say, I'm glad I did this thing. And Rob, you've spent hours and hours of time with selling dentists to DSOs. And you see them again someday. And I'm just curious, either of you, I'm a dentist, and if you're saying to this audience, what are some characteristics of successful dentists who've sold to DSOs, whether it has to do with their mindset, whether it has to do with their procedures, whether it has to do with their age? What would you say, Brannon?
I think for us, our clients that have the highest level of satisfaction are those that own larger practices, right? That would be very, very difficult to sell to a private buyer. So economically speaking, from an options perspective, the DSO route was the only route that really made sense. And those are practices typically with revenue of, let's say, $3 million plus, where if you want to monetize the business, it really becomes kind of a no-brainer. A lot of those clients are looking for several things. One, they want to de-risk, right? They've got a tremendous amount of their net worth tied up in a liquid business that has an insane amount of key man risk. And a lot of doctors don't realize how much key man risk their practice has. You are one heartbeat away, one ski accident away from your practice potentially being worth nothing. And when there's blood in the water, the sharks circle, and you are not going to be able to fetch anywhere near what you would fetch valuation-wise if you're healthy and relatively unmotivated to sell. So a lot of our clients are looking to de-risk, take some chips off the table, diversify their wealth, sleep better at night as a result, and partner with a larger entity that is well-positioned to fight some of the headwinds that dentistry is facing. DSOs have economies of scale that single practice owners don't. When it comes to negotiating better reimbursement rates with vendors, better reimbursement rates with payers and better pricing with vendors, and they have resources that they can bring to bear to help solve some of the problems, not all of the problems, that private practice owners are facing. So if you're in a situation where you own a large multi-million-dollar practice and you're within, let's say, 10 years of exiting the business for one reason or the other, whether that's retirement, relocation, or choosing another career, you want to diversify and protect some of your wealth, and you want some operational support. If you check all of those boxes, you are going to have the highest probability of being very satisfied with going down the DSO path. If you only check one or a couple of those boxes, then it becomes a more dynamic, nuanced decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What would you say, Rob?
Yeah, I would think, and sort of exists parallel to what Brannon just said. I think it's just not chasing the valuation or not chasing multiple. That understanding what the different options are, what these different DSOs can bring to you. And so if you are a dentist who is looking for support, like that type of DSO to kind of take things off your hands and not the dentist who wants to have autonomy and independence. Yeah. But like if you're looking for that, and then you end up signing with a DSO that's the exact opposite, just because they gave you a higher valuation or they promised you a better multiple. Like those are the people I find that generally are not happy because they didn't understand sort of the bigger picture, both financially, operationally, professionally. It's just they check the box of this is the best, and in most things in life, if you try to just look for what is known by others to be the best, it generally doesn't work out well for you. So that's my take where I see it.
I think that's a great. I think the takeaway there is that valuation is not the end all. I would argue that fit and deal structure are equally or more important than valuation. When you hear the stories that people are dissatisfied post-sale, it's always about culture and fit and operations, and they changed my business, and I don't like working here anymore, my staff's pissed off, whatever it is. That's typically what you hear. So it all matters, right? When you're making this decision, it all matters. The way we come at it, create that competitive environment so we can identify who is the right fit, and then use that competition as leverage to negotiate the best outcome with the DSO, not a DSO, the DSO that you deem to be the right partner for your business.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, that's really, really powerful stuff. Let me just circle back to, because I don't want to not talk about this. I think also when we talk about, should I sell to a DSO or should I sell to a private buyer, I think people don't understand that if you have the right advisors helping you with this decision, that it's not really an either or, that the decision somewhat makes itself. That if the practice is a certain size, like Brandon's talking about, you're selling to a DSO. Unless you want to take the practice to your deathbed. If you've got a practice,
Rob, Brandon, just as someone who's fit, what you're saying is great. Oh, but I have a giant practice and I have 2 associates. Why don't I just sell portions to my associates? Why do I have to sell to a DSO? I'll just chop it up with my associates and they'll all buy it. What is the usually why that doesn't work out?
Yeah, that's super easy to do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, but look, here's the thing. Like, I guess, you know what? You can, if that's what you want to do, and I've had clients that have that kind of arrangement where, like, if that allows you to be essentially an absentee owner of 50% of the dental practice for the next 25 years, then that might work,
Yeah, maybe.
That's a really tough needle to
what I'll
thread,
share is,
though. Don't get me wrong, Brannon or audience. Like, I'm not saying this is definitely the way to go. It can work, but it takes a lot of massaging to get to that
I
point.
kind of set myself up to answer it in my own way as someone who talks to more dentists than anyone. The associate dentist that's working there and making you successful isn't the one who wants to be an owner. And oftentimes offering them ownership might be a way for them to leave your organization. Because when you build a team like that, most of the time these successful associate dentists are enjoying their life as a well-paid associate and saying, hey, do you want to buy 20% and the rest of you are going to buy 20% of this thing? Like you said, Brandon, you put it more simply, that's not so easy to do. So it doesn't mean it's impossible.
It's an option. It is an option. And we're always try to be very objective. And it's like, hey, option A, B, C, D, right? Like, option 1 is don't do anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep your head down. You built a great business. You don't have to sell it. Option 2 might be to sell it to a private buyer or do some type of internal succession planning and sell pieces of it to an associate. Option 3 might be go the DSO route. Let's explore all of the options. Let's don't act like, at least at the onset of our conversation, that one is better than the other. And I think, Rob, as you said, if you go down through that exercise, the truth will reveal itself and you'll ultimately land in the right spot. The thing I want to mention is, we're talking about an alternative to a DSO sale with a large multi-million-dollar practice with multiple doctors. And the alternative is typically some type of internal succession plan, selling minority interest to multiple doctors. A lot of moving parts. That can be done. I've done it with many clients, but it's very difficult to pull off. And you need to make sure if you're going to go that route that you got Rob involved, you got a great attorney and CPA involved on your team. But what I have seen recently, and this is very troubling to me, I'm dealing with 3 transactions right now that are on the brink of falling apart, where my client has decided to bring in minority owners, associates that were working in the business that ended up being gifted or sold minority equity interest. And now we're at the point where the senior doc, the majority owner of the practice, wants to monetize their ownership in a DSO transaction because it's worth substantially more in that world than it is monetizing it to individual buyers. And by the way, the minority owners don't want to buy out senior doc,
Right.
but they are the future of the business. They are the primary producers. They are the youth in the office. And they dig their heels in and block the senior doctor
Right.
from monetizing their equity in a DSO affiliation. And even though the senior doc has a tag-along, drag-along right, the DSO is not going to buy that practice if the main producers, the minority owners, are not on board with the deal. So if you're going to go down that road, just understand there is risk, and you should approach it with some hesitancy and some trepidation in making sure that ultimately when you're ready to divest yourself of your remaining equity, what are your rights? What are you going to be able to do if your minority partners are not willing to go with the flow? And we're seeing this more and more where these minority owners, former associates, are blocking DSO sales. And now the senior doctor is stuck with equity they can't liquidate.
Right. Right. I mean, you have to have an exit strategy. No matter what you're doing, you have to know that this is what it's going to look like and how it could play out. And yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. We have the conversation with a lot of clients, Brannon, where they want to sell a portion of the practice to their associate, and it's like, well, yeah, you can, but know that you are now limiting your options down the road with that.
I can't help but say my catchphrase by the end, because that's what I said in the beginning of the meeting. Dental offices are people places, not pizza places, because you don't really care who's making your pizza as long as it turns out good. But in that example, Brandon, which was such a good one, that DSO really cares about those people who are the co-owners and how they're going to feel about this transition. And I'm assuming that the dentist with the majority of the equity may regret how he or she managed some of this.
Yeah, this is one of the most provider-centric businesses, period. Healthcare or otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, you can make one of those deals work where you bring associates on a minority interest. If you've got the type of practice and you're basically running a business like you are a DSO that happens to be a dentist, that you're not the producer, that you truly are running this like an investor, and you look at this and say, I have 5 or 6 locations. I'm not providing any kind of meaningful dentistry at any of them. I could sell it, or I could just hold this for the next, however couple decades and continue to make money off of that. Yeah, like I've got a business, right? And it's the difference between having a true enterprise, I guess, being a business. I have an enterprise here that I've built that could run without me and I can just continue to make money off of that. But there are very few dentists that have that. I mean, that is a unicorn for sure. Most of them are involved clinically, and it's not that easy just to say, I'm going to just hold this for as long as I feel like and just keep making lots of money off of it because you know what, I got a great thing here that runs itself. But very, very few people, I think, are in that situation.
Totally
true.
Brannon, this has been awesome having you. Lots of great content, and not surprisingly, from somebody that's got as much experience from you in the industry. And so I thank you for being with us today and providing all of your insight and experience to our listeners. If people want to get in touch with you, Brannon, and learn more about what you do and what McLaren and Associates does for dentists, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, I encourage you to check out our website. It's dentaltransitions.com. There's a DSO resources section of that website where we've got a lot of podcasts and webinars, conversations just like this, because we're big on, first and foremost, get educated, and get educated from a group of advisors that put your interests first and takes an objective approach to guiding you. We always start every conversation with a 30-minute casual, confidential discovery call. You can text me. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me other than email. My cell phone number is 512-660-8505. My email is Brannon, BRANNON, @dentaltransitions.com. So any of your listeners that, just want to hop on the phone and get to know each other and, talk about what's next for them and what their goals are, I'd welcome the opportunity to have a conversation.
That's great. And everybody knows always that all that info will be up in the show notes too.
Awesome, Brandon. Thanks for talking with us.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Take care.
You too. Lots of great info there. I mean, this is why you work with people that have this experience and this perspective to guide you and to give you the right advice, to help you vet different offers, and really to just walk you through the process, quote unquote, the right way.
For sure. And you need just to know about these things before you have to do your thing. I mean, it's like this is happening throughout the dental profession daily, and you just have to have, like, the best word I think was context of what to know. And,
right.
I think there's a lot more emotions than facts out there, and hopefully things like this get people to understand what they need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and there's just not a lot of transparency in these deals and these offers. You understand the part that you understand, which are the numbers. This is the valuation, this is how much cash, but that's only really the beginning of the story, and you really have to understand the rest of it if you want to be somebody that's happy with their transition. Otherwise, it's like you say, Paul, and we've talked about a lot of times on the show, and I tell my clients, otherwise you are taking what's behind door number 3. Good
and
luck.
not the door you want to take with your biggest financial decision. So,
no, sir.
So
all
good.
right. Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for listening to another great podcast with the Dental Amigos. And don't forget to tune in next time to have the dental business demystified. If you're looking for more information about today's podcast, you can find it on thedentalamigos.com. If you're looking for Paul, you can find Paul at drpaulgoodman.com. And if you're looking for Rob, you can find him at yourdentallawyer.com. This podcast has been sponsored by Orange Line Media Group, helping dentists and other professionals create content people love. Find out how we can help you take your business to the next level at www.orangelinemg.com. Till next time.